Well, a very good evening and welcome back to First Call, a funeral podcast. We're on episode 4, joined of course by none other, Bradley Shaw. Welcome back to Hawke's Bay. Always a pleasure to have you here at the funeral home.
Yeah, it's great to be back in the Hawke's Bay, Terry, and I think I might take up a permanent residency shortly.
Yeah, well, what are we going to get into today, Bradley? We're talking all about memorials, about keepsakes, and about what you guys can do with cremated remains when you eventually get those.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to talk a little bit about the burial side of things and the way we can memorialise a burial as well, through headstones and graves, etc. But the main focus here today will be relating to the cremated remains once someone's been cremated.
Yeah, we're not here to try and sell services or anything like that. We're trying to educate people, let people know what options are actually out there when it comes to memorialising their loved one. It's a good place to start, Bradley. What is a memorial?
Yeah, a memorial is a way which we use to commemorate people, and things or pastimes. And naturally, we want this for our loved ones when they pass away.
Of course, we want to pay homage to our loved ones. We want to remember them. We want to.
Yeah, exactly. And when we're using the word memorial, it can be used in so many contexts when we're talking about when somebody passes away. So it's an extremely important part of our process after the funeral specifically. And it can be done in many ways. And so what you can see obviously in front of us here this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is a couple of examples of urns, and also behind Terry there, there's some more urns as well, which we're going to get into very shortly. But we just wanted to mention that tonight, obviously, we're doing the podcast, and we would love you to put your questions through on the live stream. If you have any questions relating to anything to do with the funeral service, even better if it's to do with memorials and urns, and we'd be happy to answer them.
And that's a big part of doing this live, is that we're interactive. We're answering your questions as they come in, so comment into the comment section below. Also tonight, we haven't done this before, Brad, but for every share that you give this live stream in the next hour, we're going to donate $10 per share to hospice, which is a great thing, and I'm just so proud that we're able to do that.
That's right. And hospice does such a wonderful thing for our community, especially in the latter stages of people's lives. And we deal with us specifically, Hospice EBOP and Cranford Hospice for down here in Hawke's Bay. So we're really, really happy to be able to support that tonight. So a way that you can support that is sharing our stream. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the history of memorials. Let's talk about how memorials came about, how we got to where we are today with memorialization, and where it could possibly take us into the future.
Absolutely.
Let's start with the history.
Great start. And I've always been a bit of a history buff when it comes to funerals. I find it so fascinating what we did as a society several thousand years ago. And that's about where we start to see the formation of memorials. Traditionally, it's been headstones for thousands of years. And we look back and we can actually see them around 3000 to 4000 BC. So about 6,000 years ago. And these are the first signs that people were memorializing the deceased. And we talk about things like the gravestone, which actually in those times was a stone lid that went over the casket. And what that actually did was help keep the body underground after they buried it. And of course, back then it was quite a shallow burial. And so that big heavy stone is what kept that person underground.
And I suppose, so what you're saying there is that we sort of recognize that in today's society, where maybe in older cemeteries, you will see the full stone or concrete or marble or something across the top of the grave. And I suppose that's where it came from those many years ago.
It certainly does have its roots in those early days. Of course, as time went on, people developed language. We started putting names, dates, and started to personalise those headstones. That's come a long way in the last 6,000 years. All you have to do now is take a stroll through the cemetery and just see the vast array of personalised headstones, granite, marble, concrete, I've seen headstones with QR codes on them now. You actually snap a picture and it takes you to a web page of that deceased. You get to see their life story and their tributes, and it's quite a beautiful thing. So when we do think of memorials, it does dial up headstones for us, but as we're going to talk about tonight, there's so much more out there that people may not know of, and I'd love to get into a bit more of that.
And specifically with the cremation side of things, you know, with what we can do, you know, we're going to go through. We're only going to touch the surface tonight about what you can do to memorialise with cremated remains, but there's definitely a lot there.
Of course, cultures all around the world are doing different things, and we're specifically going to just stay on New Zealand culture for our podcast. I think that's important. We've got a New Zealand audience. Bradley, why don't you tell us a little bit of where New Zealand's come to in the last few decades in terms of burial cremation?
Yeah, I think around the early 20th century, New Zealand's preferred form of disposal became cremation. And we've spent a lot of time in the last few years doing cremations as part of the preferred disposal.
What kind of percentage rates are we at the moment?
Now we're looking at around about the 85% mark for cremation in New Zealand. And so 85% of New Zealanders are choosing that. Now, I wonder why that is, and we've done a bit of research, and I think partly it's due to the cost, and we spoke about the cost in the last podcast, didn't we? Around burials are getting really expensive.
As much as $4,000 or $5,000.
That's right, and cremations can be as low as $500.
Sure.
So that definitely has to play some kind of a part. I think the other thing is that we're running out of room in cemeteries. And so when we're running out of room in cemeteries, it tends to put people in a difficult position where maybe they opt for the cremation because of that reason, or because it's an eco-friendly, maybe they're environmentally friendly, they don't want to take up any room in a cemetery. So look, there's so many different reasons on why, but I think one of the biggest reasons nowadays for this is that there are so many options available to families with what they can do with the cremated remains.
Absolutely, and it's just not one option too. There's so many different options, and they can choose multiple options, of course, with those cremated remains. I can't wait to kind of get into some of those options tonight. I think we should really start before we move any further, and some people at home may not know, how we actually go from a body in a casket to cremated remains. And it's worth just touching on the process a little bit, I think, just before we go any further. And again, some people may not know that when someone is cremated, the body, the casket, everything goes into the cremator. Now, that's about a 90-minute process. Intense heat is what changes the body and the casket to those cremated remains that we know and see. Although that's not the end of the process. They first have to cool down, and then they're processed in what's called a cremulator. Now, that takes the bone fragments into much more smaller, granular remains that we know of as ashes.
So that's when you get the fine ash is what you get back into
that's right.
urn.
So there's nothing distinguishable in the ashes as a bone, you would say.
So when you get the ashes back from your local crematorium, or the funeral home may own the crematorium, but for us, the local crematorium, which is owned by the council, we were just talking before about the different ways in which we get them back. For you in the Hawke's Bay, you'll typically get yours back in a pine box.
Yeah, it's a beautiful plain pine urn, no frills, but for the most part, people are generally happy to receive ashes in that form.
Yeah, and for us in Whakatane, we are getting our ashes back into a plastic reciprocal, but it is perfectly fine. You know, it's a nice looking plastic urn. It's not awful by any means.
No, and I think it's a good starting point for families to decide what they want to do with the ashes next. And we talk about the funeral planning being quite a time-sensitive process. You know, we've got venues and dates and times and newspaper notices. When it comes to cremated remains, the family really has no time frames here.
That's right.
And they actually get to do it on their own pace and choose when, where, and how they'd like to.
And it's really important for people to know that, because a lot of the time there is a rush, and I think it's important that people know that there's no need to rush. If you don't know what you want done with your loved one's ashes, or your loved one didn't know what they wanted done with their ashes, take your time with that decision, because we're going to talk about all the different options on what you can do. But if you make a quick decision, you may regret it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, well, I think when people think about receiving ashes back, one of the first images that I think dials up in their mind is the urn. And we've got a couple here on display, and there's a few behind me, but really urns come in all different shapes, sizes, colours, styles, and they can really be personalised to that deceased. And so while we do get just a plain urn back from the crematorium, we really encourage people to upgrade or choose something personal, especially if they're going to keep the deceased at home until they decide what to do next, have it on display. And of course, we can engrave urns, we can put personal messages on them, name, dates. It's really quite unlimited what you can do when you want to store ashes.
And there's so many different shapes and sizes. And I mean, if you're just, interring the ashes in a cemetery, then maybe the plain box would be fine. But if you're wanting to keep your loved one on a mantle of some sort, or it's always nice to have them in something more special.
People should actually know that it's okay to keep ashes around for a little bit longer if they want to. Sometimes it might not be easy to part with the ashes, or they're waiting for an anniversary or Christmas when the family's back home, and so having something nice that they can put on the mantelpiece is quite appealing to a few people.
That's right. And we find that even on the interring side, that if for some reason they didn't want to inter the ashes, or what, for some reason, you don't have to inter the whole lot.
Absolutely.
And from that, if you want to just inter half and keep half, and you might want to do something else, which we'll talk about shortly, it's important to remember that you can do that. And
that's another benefit to that cremation over the burial. The burial is very kind of final. It's a final act. There's no further kind of actions with the deceased, whereas cremated remains, you really get that option. As you said, you can split the ashes, you can do multiple options. One of the main ones, or the first one that really comes to mind when people decide what they want to do with the ashes, is scattering.
Yeah,
it's out there. It appeals to a lot of people. Where can you scatter ashes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we sort of put it to three things: land, air, and sea. So we'll talk about each one of those, but on the land, typically there is no rules and regulations around where you can and can't scatter ashes. However, it's important to remember cultural sensitivity. So a lot of people want their ashes scattered at the beach. Well, unfortunately, they need to take into consideration that that's where Māori specifically go get their kaimoana or their seafood, and you need to be careful and need to be culturally sensitive around that.
Absolutely. And I know here in Hawke's Bay there are some local council bylaws, and I told a story earlier today about a local rose garden here in Hastings in Frimley, and a few years ago a couple of people were going down at night and actually scattering the ashes in the cover of darkness, thinking that was a beautiful place to scatter them and lay them to rest. And it caught on, and so many people actually did this at night that the rose gardens actually died. And when the council started realising what was going on, they checked and realised there was actually more ashes than soil in the gardens.
Wow.
And this obviously posed a real problem to the beautiful gardens.
Definitely.
And something that people may not know is that ashes are toxic to plants and trees. They're quite acidic. They've got a high pH, and this doesn't go too well to living plants. So actually scattering lots of ash on a rose garden may not be the most appropriate.
So it's important for people to remember that if you are, scattering around gardens and things like that, just be mindful.
Yeah, check your local authorities in your own kind of centres, what's allowed, what's not, especially when you're thinking of scattering in a public area too. At home, I think it wouldn't be so much of an issue. Now,
today we've been generously supplied these lovely urns, thanks to Mark from Lucent.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for sending those down for us.
And so we actually, while we're talking about the land, I think it's probably the best time for you to bring out your new favourite urn.
I'm so glad you brought this up, Brad. I've been excited all day to share this kind of new product, and it's relatively new to the funeral scene, and I certainly haven't seen it before this.
And people will be thinking, what on earth is that?
Yeah, what is this? And essentially, I guess you could call it an urn, a travelling urn. It's actually shaped in the walking stick. And that's exactly what it is, Bradley. And so what it does is you actually fill the walking stick with ash, and at the bottom of the walking stick, there's a mechanism there. Now, every time that hits the ground on your hike, it actually deposits a small amount of ash over the trail. And so you can walk over your favourite hiking track or your peak or your local walk, and every time it hits the ground, you're depositing a little bit of ash over the trail.
Right. So someone who loved a farm maybe or a specific hiking
Over
track.
the farm, over the ranges, anywhere you think would be really appropriate. What an amazing way to memorialise someone who loved the outdoors.
So it's a changing landscape for us, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We've got so many products on the market now that are available to families.
So different, so unique, and becoming more and more available now. So we certainly have those, and looking forward to hearing more interest about it.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about the air. We talked about the land. There's plenty of things you can do with scattering on the land. How about the air?
Yeah,
you've spoken about this today.
Yeah, and I spoke earlier podcast. I actually have a pilot's license, and I actually got to do this for a family, and this was for a keen aviator, passed away, and his family wanted to scatter over the airfield. And so we actually chartered his favourite plane. We went up with the family and did a nice pass over the airfield and scattered his ashes. And actually we used one of these tubes here, the scattering tube, which makes it really, really easy to scatter ashes. There's no fuss, there's no figuring out how to get the lid off the urn. This makes it super easy. And we were able to do that from the airplane over the airfield.
That's wonderful.
And again,
it's
another beautiful way to
it's such a fitting tribute. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
We've also got the sea. So the sea, a lot of people say, put my ashes, out at sea. And there's lots of different ways you can do this. But one that comes to mind specifically is it's shaped like a pillow. And what it is, you put the ashes inside this pillow, and it's a biodegradable exterior. And so what you do, you go out to sea and you put the urn into the water, and it'll float on the surface for 2 or 3 minutes. And then once that 2 or 3 minutes is up, it dissolves and the ash dissipates and it sinks to the bottom.
So it almost turns into like a living reef. So I understand coral and things like that can grow on it.
Yeah. So that's also another...
Wow, for someone who loved the sea, that's perfect.
So all your boaties and people, maybe Navy or... people that have had a great association with the sea tend to find that a great option.
Yeah, well, actually a fun fact I pulled up earlier today on scattering. I don't know if you're a Tool fan, the band Tool, or if there's anyone that likes Tool at home. The lead singer, Maynard Keenan, actually decided to scatter his mother's ashes over his vineyard. Actual fact, he later went on to name the wine after his mother.
Right.
So pretty interesting fact. Don't know if I would give that vintage a try, but certainly so many options available.
Definitely. We've got, as you can see, we've got so many different options here tonight. We're just going to go through a few of those options with the viewers, and just to really have a conversation about these options that Lucent have so gladly supplied us with. So I wanted to start with the jewellery. Jewellery has become an extremely popular choice among funeral homes and with people who have had their loved ones cremated.
So this is jewellery that can contain a small amount of ash.
That's right. And so what happens is the lid here just comes off like that, and a small amount of ash is deposited into that little piece there, and then it's screwed back on, and you can get a nice chain to go with it, and you can wear your loved one around your neck.
So essentially you're holding your loved one close to your heart, as literally as it gets.
That's right.
That's really beautiful.
And it doesn't just come in necklaces. We can do rings, bracelets, all sorts.
Yeah, wow.
So,
and I understand it can be a little bit finicky to get the ash in there, and most funeral homes will actually do that transfer for you, no charge. So you can actually bring your jewellery in with the ashes and ask the funeral home to do that for you. And of course, we would always do that.
And we were talking earlier about these being, somewhat of a cost-effective choice.
I know we sell them here, and they start from about $40. You can get some much nicer silver and gold ones through to $100, maybe $200. And in the scheme of a funeral service, that is a really cost-effective way to memorialise maybe Nana or Granddad and keep them with you.
But what people also do need to remember is that you won't get your whole loved one into one of these.
No, of course, it is only a very small portion. So maybe all the kids could have a pendant, and then you still need to decide what you want to do next with the remaining ash.
That's right. We spoke earlier about the roses, and the roses were obviously dying here in Hawke's Bay. And so talk to us about what you've got right there.
Yes, as we mentioned earlier, the ash or the cremated remains can be quite toxic to plants and trees. But we've actually come across one of these grow kits. And basically what this does is it allows you to mix the ash with formulated soil to reduce that pH back to a more neutral soil. And then you can plant your favourite flower or your tree in there and let it grow healthily. So it's not going to actually kill that tree. And so we sell a number of these kits. They're different sizes, depending on what you're thinking.
So it's probably one of the things to come from this is that if you are going to plant this at home or something like that, to remember that, if you do go to sell your home or anything like that, it does have a lot of sentimental value.
Certainly something to consider if you're planting a living memorial, as we like to call it, and something happens down the track, you sell that house and someone wants to cut that tree down. How are you going to feel about that? I perhaps might be quite upset. And so just thinking about where you want to plant that tree can be quite important as well. Maybe a local reserve or down at the beach or in the forest on your favourite walking track might be better than perhaps at your house, which you might sell in a couple of years.
Great idea.
Or of course, putting it into a nice pot. It's always something that you can take with you anywhere you go.
And that's right. And as you mentioned earlier, they come in different sizes, so that's not an issue.
Yeah, I always seem to see them come up on Facebook. I think there's another product called BIOS, which is very similar. But most funeral homes around the country should be able to stock those or supply those for you.
That's great.
Another really unique and different way, really, to pay tribute. Yeah.
Hey, while we're halfway through this, going through our selection of urns here, we just want to say, if you've got any questions in relation to tonight's podcast or any of the previous podcasts, and you want to ask us funeral directors anything, don't hesitate to put your questions in the live stream there, and we'll get to them very shortly.
Yeah, please, if you can ask your questions in the comments below. We are going to answer everyone's questions tonight. And of course, don't forget, for every share that we're getting on this live stream tonight, we're going to donate $10 to our local hospice. Very generous.
Very
Thank
nice.
You,
we talked about the plant and the jewellery, and they would be on the more cost-effective routes when it comes to memorialising a loved one. Let's talk about something that's not. Let's talk about encasing ashes into diamonds. Yeah,
this is something I came across a couple of years ago, so it's not something new. It has been around for a while, but essentially when we look at the elements of cremated remains, essentially it's just one element, and that's carbon. And if you know anything at home about diamonds, then you'll know that a diamond is basically just compressed carbon. And so with the ashes, what we can do is apply heat and pressure. It takes about 3 months process, but we can actually convert those ashes into a certified diamond.
Wow.
And pretty special, pretty awesome process. And at the end of it, you actually get a certificate of authenticity. That is a certified real diamond.
Wow.
And as you said, it's certainly not cheap. You were talking $5,000 to $10,000 for this process. But what you're left with is a diamond, perhaps worth $5,000.
Exactly.
And the possibility of perhaps putting that into a ring, earrings, a family heirloom, or just a really nice display.
So it's a really sentimental way of memorialising a loved one. And yes, it could cost you on the thousands. It's a super nice thing to do.
And certainly diamonds are forever. So what a fitting way to
That's
memorialise. Right. Again, not everyone's cup of tea. I do understand that. It is expensive, but just something different. And we're here just tonight to provide options to people and let them know what's out there.
That's right.
Now, another funny one that come up in the last couple of months, I keep seeing this pop up on Facebook, but ashes being able to be mixed into ink. Now, you've heard a bit about this.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of experience with people who who know a bit about mixing ashes with ink, and it's been used in both paint portraits and art, and also in tattoos.
Tattoos, right?
Yeah, so tattoos, it's a lovely idea maybe to have. It's a welcome addition, you could say, to somebody's name being tattooed on yourself, or a special heirloom of some sort.
Yeah, so I think, in today's day and age, it's more socially acceptable to have tattoos, especially if you're going to get Nana or Granddad, or perhaps Mum or Dad's name tattooed, or a quote or a message, that you can actually incorporate their ashes into that tattoo.
Yeah,
and
that's
just
right.
take it to that next level. Certainly not, again, something I would do, but for those that are into tattoos and thinking of doing that anyway, a real nice option to consider.
Yeah, look, it's not wouldn't be my cup of tea, but at the same time, my advice to anyone who was looking at getting that done would be to just make sure that you have done your research and that it's all going to go well, because you wouldn't want it to go wrong. Terry, me and you have always shared a lot of great ideas together, and we've shared things we agree on. But there's one thing that me and you don't have in common, and that's our love of space.
Oh, see, I just love space exploration, the universe, all things astrology. And so I think I see where you're going with this one.
Yeah, and so we've heard over the years where ashes have been put into a rocket
Yeah.
and sent into outer space, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually quite a real thing. And I came across it a couple of years ago through my love of kind of astrology, and I got into funeral directing, and I realized there's actually a couple of companies out there that are taking your loved one's ashes, a small portion, and they actually combine them into a rocket launch, and you can actually have those ashes launched into orbit around the Earth. They offer another one which actually goes to the moon. And in a sense, you can actually have a lunar burial, a lunar interment with your ashes, which is, for me and people that love astrology, it is the most amazing thing. I would love that. And of course, you can actually get them launched into deep space, so beyond. And for a lot of people to be amongst the stars, we talk about being stardust, and to be returned back to the stars is quite a really beautiful thing. I know I would want that for myself. And to hear that is available gets me quite excited. Even now, I'm getting quite excited.
I'll make sure I put that in your pre-arrangement.
Yeah, and actually heard that companies like Rocket Lab actually do, which is a New Zealand rocket company, actually do incorporate that into some of their launches, which is a really exciting thing. So,
and it's a special thing for people who have that interest in the astrology world. It's such a special thing for anybody to be able to do something that's, have their ashes or have their memorial into something that they were so attached to.
Absolutely, and to leave the Earth, leave the solar system one day it's a pretty spectacular thought.
Of course,
even if we won't be around to enjoy it. So, speaking of extravagant memorials, I heard you talking earlier today about fireworks. You said something about mixing ash into fireworks.
Yeah. So
tell us about that.
A few years ago, somebody here in New Zealand wanted to mix their ashes and be let off in a firework. And so at the time, it was on New Year's. They wanted to do it on New Year's. And so unfortunately, it didn't happen as per the wishes, due to some other cultural insensitivities and things. But they did do it in their own personal time, and it was such a special thing to be able to do for somebody, because if that's their wishes, then why not try and make it happen?
Totally. So in a sense, they really did go out with a bang.
That's right. They sure did. And it would have been a spectacular moment, I could only imagine, the way it went. So it's special for people, and we've only really just touched the surface so far tonight on all these different opportunities and urns and things, memorialization that's available out there. And, we've got some questions already come in here. So I think it's probably a good time to maybe start addressing them.
Yeah, we haven't touched on a few questions. Of course, now is our question and answer time. So if you're watching at home, you got any questions about memorials, about keepsakes, or anything in the funeral industry, start commenting now. We're going to answer these as we go through. Something that I quite often get asked all the time is, can ashes be mixed together?
Yeah.
I know we talked earlier about splitting ashes, but can we mix two people's ashes together?
Yeah, for sure. It is quite common, and it happens more often than you think. And so what we tend to do is just say to people, look, if you're wanting to mix ashes together, that's not a problem. We do need to take into consideration that there may be a significant amount. Per person, you're looking at around 3 to 6 kilos worth, or 3 to 4 kilos worth of ashes, sorry. So when you've got two mixed together, you could be looking at, 6 to 8 kilos of ashes.
And in terms of volume, if I was to use the scattering tube, that contains about a full set of one person's ashes. So
that's right.
Just be prepared that you may need to get 2 urns with those mixed ashes.
And it obviously depends on the person and size and things like that. But, you may be able to get 2 people into this lovely red one here with the Pūtakawa on it. Maybe. But, yeah, you definitely need to plan for 2 people, that's for sure. A bigger or multiple urns.
Certainly. What about sending ashes around the country? Can we do that by post, courier? Do you know much about that?
Yeah, it's a tough one, Terry, because we were talking about things that have happened with ashes over the years, and you were saying about some ashes got lost a few years ago. So it's not recommended to send ashes around the country at all. But it does happen because of, people being located in different areas and things happening around the country. People can't get to where they need to be, or they have to go home, or whatever it may be. So it is a responsibility to try and make sure that doesn't happen.
Sure. Certainly losing ashes in the mail is one of the worst things that could probably happen to a family. So we certainly don't encourage couriering. It's obviously better to wait till you get a chance to drive out of town and take them yourself. But if you do choose to courier ashes, that you just know that the risks associated with that.
We've got one here, and it says, can you take ashes with you overseas?
Yeah, and this actually happens more than you think it would, where people are expat or they just want to be laid to rest in their homeland or overseas, and the family want to take them back. It's certainly something that can be done, and what you actually need to do that is a travel certificate. Now, you can get this from the crematorium that cremated that person, or your local funeral home who are able to generate that certificate. Now, that just says that yes, this person was cremated and that their ashes are sealed in an urn available for travel.
So we would not recommend anybody to put ashes into their luggage.
No, good point. So if you are taking ashes overseas, then you do need to take those on your carry-on so that you can produce them easily if you get stopped. If they're in your luggage, there's a good chance customs are going to stop that and potentially delay or lose your luggage. So something to consider.
There you go. Well, Terry, we've had a great podcast tonight talking about all things memorialization. We've got such a wonderful display here. Thanks to Lucent for supplying this for us tonight. We're so happy that we've been able to, conversate between us and to be able to represent this to people at home who maybe were considering different options for their cremated remains, or maybe still deciding between burial and cremation. Yeah,
it's certainly about just getting the information out there, educating on people what is available, and not just doing that urn or interment and just letting people know that there are options out there. And that's what we're all about. That's what these podcasts have always been about. We're not here to sell services, but let people know what is available. I just want to do another special thank you to Lucent for helping us out for this podcast and supplying some beautiful urns and memorials. And of course to Dan Brown from Indelible once again for setting up the stream and helping us there.
And look, it's been a great day down here in the Hawke's Bay. We've managed to get some really good content together for the public. We will be back for episode 5, and we hope to have some great content lined up for that episode.
Yeah, we do. We've got something pretty exciting for our next podcast, which will be coming next month. And we'll make some announcements in the near future, but it's going to be a goodie.
Until then, it's been great to be down here. Thank you very much to everyone for watching and listening, and we'll see you soon.
And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.